A man like Idi Amin must always live with this constant fear. You see, you never know when your best friend is going to be the instrument of your slave's liberation. So the three things about the fall then are that man turned in upon himself. Man's self became his own fetish. In order to preserve this, he had to dominate others. He had to hold others under. In one form or another, he has had to enter into a sort of an arms race, to constantly keep the other one aware that he has the drop on him. And the third thing is that this constitutes a misrepresentation of what God is like. It is painting the picture of God in reverse. This is so much the case now that you're better writing a view of what God is like in opposition to what man is, rather than the other way around. In other words, you say, man is this, but God is not like that, he is like this. Whereas as God created man, you should have been able to say, man is this, therefore God is like this. But now you have to say, man is this, but God is not like that, he is like this. The gospel is to be seen in this context. The man, coming back to verse 45 as I promised now, the man, the Son of Man, came, says Jesus, but he came to serve. So that even our salvation, not surprisingly, consists in great service. Our salvation is service, the service of God in Christ for us. Now that's a real interesting thing about salvation, because salvation consists in God serving his enemies. Romans says, while we were enemies, God befriended us, in Romans 5:10. So you see that God's way of salvation was the way of supreme service in the doing and the dying of Jesus Christ. He came to set us free. But the interesting thing was that his mode of setting us free was by putting himself in bondage, as it were, surrendering himself to others, to God and to others, to laying down his life, as Jesus put it on one occasion. You see, in order to set people free, God himself bound himself. And as Augustine, I think it was, said, it wasn't the nails that held him to the cross. It was his love for you and for me, you see. In other words, he bound himself voluntarily, willingly, in order that you and I might be free. As Paul puts it in another instance, he became poor that you and I may become rich. Can you see it in reverse now? So, without turning the gospel into an example thing, first and foremost, I don't want to do that just at this point, but let me put another marginal comment and say this. It only stands to reason that the chief characteristic of sanctification, therefore, should be this service of others. If God is going to use us in liberating others, if God is going to use us in freeing others, and indeed this continual freeing of ourselves, it's going to be in service. It's going to be in willing bondage. That's why Paul, I should imagine, joyed to call himself the bond slave of Christ. Paul, servant of Jesus Christ. But the main thing I want to say at this point is that the grand and glorious good news of the gospel is this, that God himself in Christ came to set us free. He says here to give his life a ransom for many, to deliver us, to redeem us, as we say. And the way he did this was that he conformed to the law of God perfectly in both its positive and negative aspects for you and for me. But what I want to do is to give some concrete content to that conforming to the law of God in the positive and negative aspects in this talk tonight. You see, conforming to the law of God by the man meant that he came and lived a perfectly altruistic existence. In other words, our true extrinsic existence, our true extrospective existence, our true alterocentricity, our true outgoingness to others is to be found in Jesus Christ. You see, he conformed, he lived that life. And it's summed up by Jesus in saying that the two great commandments are to love God with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our soul, with all our strength, and with all that is within us, and our neighbour as ourselves. That's what Jesus did. That's true alterocentricity, true otherness-centred, true other-directed, perfectly given over to God, perfectly serving our fellow man. That's conformity to the law. It sums it all up so beautifully, as Paul is later to point out in the epistle to the Galatians. He did that for you and for me who believe. And he died on the cross, remember. He paid the penalty for our failure to do it. This is the way I like to put it. He lived the life that you and I have not lived, and he died the death for the life that you and I have lived. He lived the life that you and I have not lived, perfect other-centeredness. And he died the death for the life that you and I have lived, perfect self-centeredness. So that even our good and even our ethical greatness is tainted through and through with desire to protect ourselves. So that in Christ we have this perfect form of existence. Perfect manhood is to be found in Jesus Christ. And of course, he served God and his fellow man perfectly. And he did it redeemingly. He did it for you and for me. His first thought in the morning and his last thought at night, and his first thought in waking during the night was God and his fellow man. It's not without it's not for accident or incidental reason that the Bible speaks of Jesus being moved with compassion over a crowd that was hungry and such. His thought was for others all the time, in perfect service, and of course in this great service of a saving life and death on the cross. So that our freedom is a gift in Christ. That's the first and foremost thing that we have to stress. That it has been done for us in Christ. And we ought not to try to do it in order that we may be accepted. It is a gift. Because only this perfect freedom for others and for God comes in Jesus Christ. If we don't realize this, then what will happen is this: we'll resort back to the old way of frantically running around, being nice to God and each other, and being embarrassingly serving one to another, all with a design to get God on side. You see, we're back into the pit. It's only as we realize its perfect gift in Christ, its perfect accomplishment, it is the great fait accompli in Christ. It's only as we realize that we stand perfectly accepted in God's sight forever on the ground of what Jesus has done, that we can look to God and look to each other without this terrible ulterior motive. It's very important for us to understand. So if you're frantically running around being such a lovely person to get God on side, and if you're using me to do it, quit it. if you don't mind. Because I get more enjoyment out of a pagan doing it, who's got no ulterior motive. I don't want to be someone's stepping stone to heaven. I don't want to feel that I'm being used all the time. And I'm sure you don't either. So when you be nice to me in the conference, I want to be quite convinced that it's the loving response for salvation, and you're not using me like a human rosary. Have you got the message? All right, well, if you've got the message, let's have a break right there.